folks? Tim Allard from Ontario Outdoors and author of Ice Fishing, the Ultimate Guide. I'm here today to talk a little bit about the different jigging sequences you can use to catch more fish through the ice. I'm on a mid-lake hump here, and I'm fishing for walleyes. They're eating perch, and I've got one here. And this fish came up about 3 feet and hit this little blade bait I'm using. So a nice little walleye in the winter, let him go. And I was using a blade bait. Now, when we're talking about jigging sequences through the ice, we're really talking about two different types of lure movements, or rod movements, which in turn affect how your lure behaves in the water. We're talking about fairly large jigging sequences. I'll just get this bait back in the water and show you, which include kind of large lifts or 1-2 hops. These will call fish in on structures, kind of pique the interest of either an individual fish or a school if you're after a schooling fish like perch, for example. From here, we move down into more subtler movements, little hops, little twitches of the rod tip, side-to-side handshakes, really light quivers of the hand, and when we're not trying to move the rod tip so much. And then another type of jigging move that I like to use as well is, instead of raising your rod, you actually just kick it down. So this type of stuff. And all these different things can be incorporated into a kind of jigging dance routine, so to speak, to try and trigger fish to bite once you've attracted them with these larger moves. So we have these shakes, side-to-side moves, downward tips, downward pushes of the rod tip. So we have the large lifts and then the smaller moves. But there's two other things that we want to keep in mind when jigging on the ice. One is, with every up, there's a down. And so how fast you allow your lure to fall. These walleyes are pretty aggressive, so I'm letting it drop pretty quick, and I'm going to get back into the strike zone to see if I can get another one here. But coming back to this notion of how fast you let a lure fall, you can let it free fall, so you come up and then just let it fall on its own. That's fast. That works well for aggressive fish. But if you lift up, and if you've called the fish in, you see it on your electronics, and you let it free fall and it spooks, well, that fish probably isn't as aggressive as you thought. So you want to do a controlled fall, and all you're doing there is just following the lure with your rod tip as it sinks. So that's a controlled fall there. The other big component that you always want to factor in to a jigging sequence is a pause. And a lot of fish are a little bit less rambunctious in the winter than they are in the summer. So to increase how many fish you catch on the ice, one of the best things you can do is pause, because that's going to allow fish to get a really good lock on a moving lure if you're using this type of stuff to call them in. Let the lure settle back to where you were jigging it before. Always try and return it to where you started it in the water column. So if I'm 3 feet off bottom, I want to make sure that's where I come back to. So if I've called the fish in and I lift the lure and comes back to the same spot, it's there, he's got the target, and he attacks, and you set the hook. And that's going to definitely increase the number of fish you catch on the ice. So keep these tips in mind the next time you find yourself out enjoying a beautiful day in the winter doing some ice fishing. You have your big moves, your smaller moves, your different velocities of fall, and the all-important pause. Those are some of my favorite things to keep in mind when I'm out here jigging. I'm Tim Allard from Ontario Outdoors. Stay safe in the winter and have fun.